is York Comprehensive High School. I know a lot of people thought it was a small college, but it's a beautiful school and beautiful place to have this, and we appreciate York School District and York High School for letting us use the auditorium tonight. My name is Bob Norwood. I'm the Executive Director of York County All On Board. Our coalition is funded by the Drug Free Communities Grant. We're in the 10th year of our second 5-year cycle, so we're in our last year of the grant and working on ways to sustain our coalition. Two goals that we have with our coalition are, one, to collaborate with the community, which we do daily, and two is to work to reduce substance abuse among teens. The opioid crisis has caused that teenage age range to broaden somewhat, since a lot of the issues that we have in that area are with young adults and even older people that are involved in this issue. But the goals of this summit are two. One is to inform you about the facts and the science and the emotions and the warning signs and the treatment trends surrounding the opioid crisis in this country, state, and York County. And you'll hear, we'll go from sorrow and tragedy to hope and treatment in this hour or so. And our second goal is to answer questions you may have about this crisis toward the end of the program. One question that maybe you may have is how the opioid crisis in this country got started and how did we get to the point where we are today. And I brought a book with me tonight called Dreamland. Anybody read it? I figured you'd read it. By Sam Quinones. It's a fascinating, sad, realistic book about this crisis. It reads like a novel, but it unfortunately is true. You're welcome to peruse through the book or read the flap or write down the author's name or whatever, but I recommend that if you really do want to know how all this got started in this country, that book's going to tell you. In fact, I will say this since Marvin Brown is in the audience tonight. Marvin Brown is mentioned in the book, as are several other folks in York County in law enforcement, because Sam Quinones interviewed them about the opioid crisis getting into Charlotte and into the Carolinas. Very thorough book. All of you have a note card. The note card is simply to write down a question if you have it during the sessions. I suggest that if you have a question that you write it down when it comes to your mind and then hold on to it, and we'll collect it toward the end of the hour. There are information tables up front, and we would like for you to, when we finish tonight, if you would hang around and come up and peruse through the information here and look at what we have, and if there are samples that you're certainly welcome to take one with you. We've got some great speakers tonight. I think you're going to be very well informed when you leave here tonight about this issue. And I want to introduce the speakers now very briefly. Instead of a bio, we're just going to tell you who they are, and they're going to come up here in the order that I introduced them, and I'm not going to come up here in between and take the time to do that. So, first of all, Danielle Center. I guess raise your hand when I call your name so people will know who you are. She is the new Executive Director of Keystone. She's going to talk about the local, state, and national facts about the opioid issue. Dr. Jack Emmel is here today. He's the Medical Director of Charleston Center in the Department of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services, or DEODAS, and he's going to talk about the science of addiction. Melissa Davis Boyd is here with us tonight, and we're very appreciative. She's going to talk about her family's personal story and mention maybe some of the warning signs of addiction and opioid use. Amy is here also. She's a Keystone alumni. She's going to be talking about her story of hope and recovery. Kathy Carruthers is here tonight. She is also with Keystone. She's the treatment director there, and she's going to talk about treatment trends. And Sheriff Kevin Tolson is here also with us tonight. He's going to talk about Narcan stats and how they have been used in York County, and actually we'll have a little video to show you of actual administration of Narcan to an actual victim. So with that said, we're going to get started, and hopefully we'll get through on time, and we'll be able to answer questions at the end. Danielle.
All right, so like Bob said, my name is Danielle Center, and I am the Executive Director of Keystone Substance Abuse Services. I just wanted to kind of start off with just making sure everybody's on the same kind of page with what an opioid is, because we hear opioid a lot, but a lot of times we don't really define it. So the definition really of opioid is really just kind of a pain reliever, and this oftentimes you're going to hear it as Oxycontin, Vicodin, codeine, Percocet. Those are common prescriptions that you see for opioids. But I also want you guys to know that heroin and fentanyl also fall into this category. So when you hear opioids, it is kind of broad and includes all of those. Bob mentioned a little bit about how this started, and this is all in the book Dreamland, but it did start off by two doctors writing a letter back in 1980. And in that letter, they wrote, less than 1% of opioid users become addicted to the drug. And that statistic right there was cited 901 times in scholarly articles. So as you can see, that's kind of how this started. And after that letter went out there, in 1996, we started to see an influx of marketing and prescribing of Oxycontin. And we saw physician bonuses go from about 1 million to 40 million in about a 5-year span. So that's why this started, is that there was some sort of incentive for physicians to start prescribing it. On top of that, pain became the 5th vital sign. Okay, how do you diagnose pain? Right? You diagnose pain on a scale of 1 to 10, or you look at a smiley face on the wall. And so what plays into that is then physicians started to be rated on patient satisfaction. So if their patients were not leaving a place satisfied, then they weren't going to get any sort of incentive, or they were going to kind of get reprimanded for it. So those are why this kind of started, and why we started to see the overprescribing. And so we often saw that prescriptions were wrote for too many days, too high of a dose, and then obviously just too many prescriptions in general. And it is very important to know that just one prescription, one pill, can cause somebody to become addicted to opioids. And so what came out of this is we started to see pill mills popping up. So obviously a lot of people knew that this drug had become addictive. There was a lot of money around it. So we saw a lot of places that were just really just popping out pills out of these places. And so that's where this problem really started. So when we talk about youth, where do people get these pills from? Oftentimes it still is your parents' and grandparents' medicine cabinet. And so we do encourage people to have locked medicine cabinets. And then if you do have basically pills that are left over, to dispose of them properly. And so I don't know if you guys have heard of Operation Medicine Drop. We have permanent drop box locations in every law enforcement office in York County, where you can just go anonymously to get rid of your medication. And the key about locking the medicine cabinets too is that know that anybody that comes in your house, maybe it's not even just youth, but if you have a cleaner, or if you're trying to sell your house and you have an open house, people are going into your medicine cabinet and taking these pills, and then they're getting out there on the street. The other thing I put up here is legitimate prescriptions. So sometimes a lot of people think, when you think of kind of somebody that's addicted to opioids, you often think that they're just getting it always kind of off the street and stuff like that, and that's not really how a lot of this starts. There's a lot of cases where people were actually prescribed something legitimately, where they had some sort of injury, some surgery, where they were prescribed an opioid. Oftentimes we see wisdom teeth surgeries. There was a lot of opioids prescribed when youth got their wisdom teeth out, and so that's how this problem started at such a young age. Most times somebody's exposed to the first opioid is when they are a youth, because of these things right here. And then obviously we all know that youth are going to get most of the pills from their friends and peers, just like anything else. So we saw a shift from prescription opioids to heroin and now fentanyl. And it's important to know that when you talk about a heroin user, nobody really wants to be a heroin user. Okay, I think a lot of people have a misconception about that, but people turn to heroin because it is cheaper and it is easier to access. And so 75% of people that have used heroin started with some sort of prescription opioid, but because of the constraints and barriers with getting that, that's when you saw the switch. And it wasn't until a few years ago where we really started to see the increase of fentanyl. Okay, fentanyl is 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine. Fentanyl is also a prescription, but that's not the fentanyl that we're seeing out on the streets. We're seeing fentanyl coming in from other countries. And so what the problem is with fentanyl is because it is so powerful, you can see in that picture right there that those are fatal doses of those drugs. Okay, and if you look at that fentanyl, it looks about, like 20 grains of salt. And we'll talk a little bit later too when Sheriff Tolson comes up about how powerful it is even to the touch. But what's happening now, even in our county, is that fentanyl is being laced with heroin, and sometimes the user knows it, and sometimes they don't. Okay, it's being laced with other drugs, marijuana, cocaine, meth, and we've also seen that fentanyl is being pressed into pills and sold as Oxycontin. Right, so this is the dangerous part of it, and that's why we're seeing a significant number of overdoses. Like I said, sometimes the user knows it and the dealer knows it, sometimes they don't. And so that's why this is very dangerous, and we've seen an influx of overdose deaths. Obviously, we've heard that this is a national problem. It's a national epidemic. We declared it a public health emergency in October 2017. But just to give you some more numbers, in 2016, we saw 64,000 deaths related to drug overdoses. Okay, and then 2017, we're looking at about 72,000. So that's about 197 people per day. That's about a plane going down every single day. And a large part of that is because of the opioid epidemic. 10 million people 12 years and under have reported non-medical use of prescription opioids. That is concerning that it is an opioid and not just a prescription drug. And then approximately 1 in 5 high school seniors report misusing it in their lifetime. To bring it closer to home, 8% of 11th graders have said that they've used this non-prescription drugs in the past 30 days. Okay, so that's more of your regular users. And we have 8% of our 11th graders that are using. And just to kind of look at this, I'm going to pop up a couple pictures. The darker the color is where we start to see the bigger the problems in terms of drug overdose deaths. Okay, so this is back in 2014, and it's just going to be a 3-year span. Okay, so you can kind of see how the country has changed and how the overdose deaths are really kind of just increasing all over, and we're kind of where it's coming next. And we've seen that locally as well. And that all is really part of the opioid epidemic, because it's not just the polydrug things, which there is still a lot of polydrugs, but the opioid epidemic is a big piece of this. So just bringing it a little bit more local, looking at state numbers, in 2017, 740 opioid-related overdose deaths. That's more than homicides. Okay, so that's a lot of deaths in 1 year. I don't know what we're looking at for 2018, but in a 3-year span leading up to 2017, overdose deaths increased 118%. Overdose reversal is using Narcan. For those of you that don't know, Sheriff Tolson will talk about Narcan in a little bit, but Narcan is a medication that you can give somebody that is experiencing an overdose that stabilizes them until they get medical treatment. And so those are the numbers from EMS and law enforcement, so that just shows you how many lives were actually saved because of that medication. And then obviously Governor McMaster, he has held 2 opioid summits in the past 2 years, and so he obviously also declared a public health emergency just like the White House did. And part of his declaring it a public health emergency, he established an opioid emergency response team in South Carolina. And then he also did an executive order where for acute and post-operative pain, so this does not include chronic pain, that you can only get a prescription for about 7 days. And that's the prescription that is covered. So we have found out that you can have a longer prescription, but then that starts to come out of pocket or finding some other sources. But in terms of Medicaid and state health insurance as well, they're doing 7 days for acute pain. So that's supposed to help with that over-prescribing piece of it. And then just to kind of wrap it up, to bring it home, to let you guys know that you always hear national and state, this is a problem in York County. okay? And just look at the chart there. The opioid overdose deaths continue to rise. They kind of level 2016, 2017 with 47 to 48 deaths. But look at how the fentanyl has jumped up. And fentanyl is in our community and it's out there, and we need to start really educating people about the dangerous part of that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Emma, who's going to talk to you about the science of addiction.
Okay, so I'm a little shorter than the average microphone. It's my pleasure in 20 minutes to tell you everything we've learned in the past 50 years, so work with me. It's called the science of addiction. I'm a big one on words, so let's talk about what science means. Science means we're involving physiology and pathology of the body. Now, addiction, that's a little harder to come by, so I've written down here kind of the official sort of scientific definition, and I'm going to read it out loud even though I know you can read. Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. Dysfunction in these circuits leads to characteristic biological, psychological, social, and spiritual manifestations. This is reflected in an individual pathologically pursuing reward and or relief by substance use and other behaviors. Something's gone wrong in the brain in people who are addicted versus those who are just using and not addicted. That being said, doctor people always got all these long-winded words and stuff, so tonight I have for you Jack's 3 simple questions to decide if somebody's addicted. First of all, if the person expresses a very strong desire, they might refer to it as craving. They might use the word obsession. Some people even say they need it in order to survive. That's number 1. The second question is it out of control? Is it unmanageable? Are you a poor predictor of when you'll stop once you've started? And if the answer to those 2 questions is yes, the inevitable result is bad stuff happens to you. Now, it could be any manner of bad stuff. I can use the fancy word adverse consequences if you like. But it's bad stuff. Anything from late on the rent payment to got shot or raped or killed or overdosed, or Hep C or HIV or bad relationships or lost your child. There are any number of bad things that happen. And then people who are intelligent humans who know full well exactly what's going to happen, somehow, when that craving and that desire and that need comes again, they use anyway. And they're no better at controlling it that time, and more bad stuff happens. If you answer, yes, I have a craving, yes, I can't control it, yes, when bad stuff happens, I go around to do it again, then you're addicted. You don't have to do any fancy interviewing, you don't have to do any long definitions. That's the deal if you want to know. What does that mean? This is a crude representation of the brain. You'll see the magenta stuff in the middle there, that kind of horizontal area. I could name various medical structures in there, but basically the chemistry in that core part of the brain has gone wrong. That's the part of your brain where you do things like eat to survive, drink to survive, have functional relationships in order to live a reasonable life. All the things that kind of keep you in existence, that area gets hijacked and becomes dysfunction. The circuitry is wrong. Then you'll see that arrow that moves towards the front part of the brain. I don't know if you ever watched any science fiction movies, but did you ever notice what part of the head is always bigger on those guys coming from other planets? It's always the front end, the frontal lobes. That's where we weigh pros and cons in order to make a reasoned decision and exhibit judgment and executive function over how we will conduct ourselves. That area is also influenced by this primary core area of the brain being abnormal, making it not surprising that judgment is compromised. Well, when you have an epidemic such as this, it's a public health problem. And when there's a public health problem, you really need to have a multi-pronged approach with everyone on board and really do everything you can, from treatment to law enforcement to social work to community resources to family support. Everything you can possibly do needs to be done when you have a public health problem. If there's some science-based treatment available, that should certainly be part of the massive community response. I would like to suggest that we have a lot of experience with other chronic diseases and what works, so I'd like to make a comparison for you. I'm going to compare the treatment of addiction and the handling of it with that of type 2 diabetes, so-called adult onset diabetes. Don't know if you ever wondered how you come down with a case of diabetes, but there usually has to be some sort of genetic or hereditary predisposition, something that makes you more susceptible. Onto that, you add some unwise choices with respect to a few things: diet, weight, and exercise. At some point, if you have the genetic tendency and you exhibit unwise behaviors, you may develop the case of diabetes. Unlike other people who don't have the genetic predisposition and exhibit unwise behaviors, who don't get diabetes. Well, we've done a lot of research now, and in addiction we know that there are genetic components as well, some for more general addiction and some actually specific to certain drug classes, upon which a person exhibits unwise judgment about what they use, how much, how often, where, and with whom. The same thing that other people without a genetic predisposition do and use drugs and don't get addicted. For everyone that is addicted, there's other people out there using who are not addicted. Well, of course, the severity is variable. It's not either yes, you have it, or no, you don't. It kind of is, but it's different severity. For some people with diabetes, they may give up dessert, run around the block twice, and their blood sugars are doing better. Other people are exhibiting perfect dieting, behaviors, everything else, and they still need insulin, medications, and they're still having trouble staying under control. So it is with addiction. Some people who may develop alcohol dependence decide, I'm going to remove the alcohol from the house, go to one AA meeting, and they're fine. Other people have been in detox and rehab 3 times, and they're trying as hard as they can, and they're still relapsing to their addiction. So with diabetes, we have certain criteria that we use to say, you have it. And so it is with addiction. People look in the book that says, what are the criteria that manifest those things that we call addiction? The other thing about a chronic disease, by nature of calling chronic, is once you've got it, you've got it. Even when your diabetes is under control, you don't not have diabetes, you have diabetes under control. If you get successful treatment for your addiction, you don't not have addiction, you have addiction in recovery. Well, of course, I'm sure you can guess, although it might not be that obvious until we're talking, the primary treatment for diabetes is make wiser choices. Has anyone ever been given advice by your physician to make a wiser choice about your lifestyle? Maybe for blood pressure or whatever? By a show of hands, how many 100% followed the advice? Wow, 0%? Really? Okay, so I'm just saying, that's how it goes. So it's no different for people with addiction. They receive advice, and they don't follow it as well as people do they don't follow it any worse or better than people with diabetes. So after 100 years of research, there's tons of medications for diabetes, including insulin itself. So we say, okay, we're going to prescribe you some medication to help you out. Has anybody here ever been prescribed a medication for anything? By a show of hands, how many took it exactly as prescribed? 3. Generally, we don't do it exactly as prescribed. If I got a strep throat and I'm getting 10 days of penicillin, in 5 days I feel better, I'm thinking, I could probably save the other 5 days. The next time I'm sick, I can take it, I don't have to go to the doctor. It's what we do. Humans treat themselves. It's how we do it. And it's no different with addiction. The difference is we hardly have any medicines because we're like 70 years behind in research, but we have a few. I'm going to digress for a minute and talk a little bit about one study that's not on the slide here. There was a study published in 2000 in the Journal of the American Medical Association in which they compared 4 diseases that you get by partial hereditary susceptibility and unwise lifestyle choices. They are diabetes, addiction, high blood pressure, and asthma. They took all these people and they treated them until they were controlled, in remission, whatever word you want to use. Then they followed them over the course of a year to see who relapsed or got out of control, or whatever word you want to use for that. Of course, you know who relapsed the most, right? Nobody. They all relapsed at the same rate. People with addiction relapse not because they're addicts, they relapse because they're human. This is what humans do with chronic disease. We don't take care of ourselves that well. So, usually patients are partially compliant, and the ones who try harder or do more of the right things do better. So we develop support systems. We give dietary managers, and we have exercise physiologists, and we counsel families on what to bring, what to buy, how to fix food in the home, and so on. And so with addiction, people partially compliant with suggestions, we do the same thing. We get counseling, we get family counseling, we maybe have some self-help groups, all kinds of things we can do to try to support. But we know that patients aren't going to do the best for themselves as a rule, so we use our medications to try to titrate and get the best response, the best health, the best quality of life for that person that we can. And like I said, with diabetes, we have many medications. And yet still, even today, in people with addiction in whom suboptimal compliance is expected, are they getting a medication? Are we saying, I don't know if you deserve it, I don't know if you're trying hard enough yet? And in fact, we do have three, for opiate use disorder, we do have three evidence-based, well-researched, FDA-approved medications. Even in highly motivated patients who do well with diabetes, there aren't that many that are going to get away without some medication. The idea of being abstinent from medication is nice. It would be good if we can get it under control and get you off medication, but that's kind of the lower priority list. First, keep you alive, develop your quality of life, get your family going, then we worry about it. And yet somehow, when it comes to addiction, the goal seems to be, whether explicitly or implicitly said, medicine is bad, don't want you on it, if you have to use it, it's a crutch, you're stuck, get off it as soon as you can. Well, people are dying, medications work, and we really need to, abstinence is a great goal, but maybe we could lower it in priority in the meantime and have that be a later result, just like we would in other chronic diseases. So, this is a new thing for the community and many people to understand about addiction, that they've developed a special word for it. It's called medication-assisted treatment, MAT. In every other condition we treat in medicine, we just call it treatment. We would never not use a helpful medication if it was going to help. So, what are the medications? There are three. The first one is called methadone. Methadone is an opioid drug. When you take it, it goes to the same opioid receptors all the other one does. Its claim to fame is that it lasts a long time and achieves a steady state in the brain. It's the up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down that wreaks havoc on the brain circuitry. A steady state level has been shown that the brain begins to return towards normal even with the medication in there. It stabilizes what's gone wrong with the brain and allows the person to sit still long enough to engage in counseling, self-help, and other needed recovery activities. If the dose is properly chosen, that can be the end result. And I emphasize properly chosen in the same way that we would for a diabetic medication or a blood pressure medication. There are side effects to medications and there are downsides. It has to be the right dose at the right time. Methadone is available only in specially federally licensed, highly regulated clinics. Consequently, more recently, we have another medication called buprenorphine. Sometimes you may hear the term Subutex or Suboxone or other similar names. Buprenorphine is an opioid drug. It goes to the opioid receptors like all the other ones do. The idea is to stabilize the craziness that's gone wrong in the brain because it lasts a long time, just like methadone does, so that people can make themselves available for other recovery-oriented activities. The difference with buprenorphine is that a physician or nurse practitioner or physician assistant who has taken requisite training can get a special waiver from the DEA to say you may prescribe it out of your office. You can get treatment right in the doctor's office, just like you do for your diabetes and your hypertension. Furthermore, there's a ceiling effect on buprenorphine. If you take more and more and more and more, at some point it doesn't have any more effect. Chances of overdose, therefore, are decreased compared to methadone. I don't want to sugarcoat it. Most people are using other drugs too, and when you add them together, it can still be fatal, even with buprenorphine. The third medication is naltrexone. Narcan, the overdose reversal, that chemical name is naloxone, and it blocks opioid receptors from the opioids having effect. Therefore, it can reverse your overdose. Naltrexone is a complete opioid blocker also, but you can take it in a pill or in a long-acting injection, and it lasts for 1 day for the pill, take it daily, or for 28 days if you take the injection. It completely blocks all the opioid receptors, so that if you were to use an opioid, you wouldn't feel it. It's blocked from acting. This medication is not an opioid, it's non-narcotic, it's non-dependence producing, and it can be administered or prescribed by anyone with no special license. It doesn't relieve the craving as well as the methadone and the Suboxone, so you have to, like everywhere in medicine, between the medical provider and the patient, you make an assessment of what's going to be the best thing to try for this person at this time out of these 3 medications. None is better or worse than the other. They're used at different times and different places. So, to summarize, opiate addiction is a chronic disease exactly like other chronic diseases such as diabetes. If you're going to have a multimodal community response, you should be using evidence-based science treatments, and part of that, in the case of the opioid epidemic, is the use of FDA-approved medications, properly done under the watchful eye of appropriate professionals, combined with the rest of treatment, all the other recovery activities necessary. Okay, thank you. And we'll turn it over to next. Any slides?
Am I taller than him? Wow. Okay. Hello. All right, y'all please excuse me. I do have notes because I have gotten up before and become a blubbering mess, and I'm going to attempt not to do that tonight so that y'all can hear our story. So let me start by saying thank you to each of you for being here. I say this because the fact that you are here tonight shows that you too are concerned about the rapidly growing opioid epidemic that our community is facing. And I know that not one of us can do anything about it by ourselves. It absolutely takes all of us and everybody else in our community to join together. Now let me introduce myself. My name is Melissa Davis Boyd. I've lived in Rock Hill since I was born 40 years ago, and I've made Rock Hill my family's home. I've been married to my husband Dwayne for almost 18 years, and we are now raising our 3 children in Rock Hill to the best of our ability. I'm an RN that works on the oncology floor at Piedmont Medical Center. My mom lives in Sharon and works at the church that we have attended for as long as I can remember. My older brother Chris is a salesman in Fort Mill and is married to his wife Tiffany. They also are raising 2 beautiful children. But I'm standing here before you not to tell you those things about me. I'm standing here to tell you that I am the daughter of a narcotic addict, the granddaughter of an alcoholic, and the big sister of Joe Davis, who passed away from an accidental heroin overdose on October 4th of 2009. My dad went to rehab at the Betty Ford Center when I was in high school and was in recovery until he passed away from heart disease 18 years ago. My mamaw, on my mom's side, was also in recovery when she passed away in 1992 from lung cancer. Joe passed away at the age of 28 after a 16-year battle with addiction starting when he was just 12 years old. According to the journal found in his car after he passed away, he had been clean for almost 15 months before heroin stole him from us. As you can see, I'm no stranger to the damaging effects that opioids can have on individuals and their families. If I am being honest with you, I don't remember much about being around my dad when he was using narcotic pain medications, although I do remember going to visit him in rehab. I remember his dresser in his bedroom and the multiple pill bottles that sat on top of it. I remember him going to work, coming home, and zoning out, sitting on his bed at night, watching TV until him and my mom went to bed. I really don't remember a lot of the things about my childhood and my youth that most people do remember, but I imagine that has something to do with the atmosphere that I grew up in. Joe started using gateway drugs like alcohol and marijuana pretty early, I'm guessing around the age of 12. I'm 2.5 years older, and at that time, I never could have imagined the long road that was ahead. It seemed like stuff that a lot of the kids were doing, especially the cool, fun ones. Joey was always in the fun crowd, while Chris and I hung with the kids that were not doing that kind of fun stuff. I think we were both just known as Joe's older brother and sister. We didn't actually have names. I can remember once when my dad found a bottle of vodka in Joey's trunk. My dad took it and he put it on his dresser as if to display it in front of Joey and say, "This is something that you can't have." Not too long afterwards, Joe went ahead and helped himself to that bottle of vodka while my dad was at work, and then he refilled it with water, and there it sat. Funny, but in retrospect, not that funny. I remember Joe skipping school with a friend in an attempt to spend the day in my parents' house, smoking weed and just hanging out, until my parents decided to come home from lunch, and then all of a sudden there was a crew of police and canine search dogs looking for him and his friend. He called me a few hours later and asked me to come and pick him up. He was just a few miles up the road. When he got in the car and I told him that my dad was likely about to choke him, he was just really amused that he had figured out a way to throw the dogs off with various scents. He got arrested more times than I can remember. It was never for the really big stuff. We were usually just called to come and bail him out. And he knew if he called me that I'd come every time. I guess when I really think about it, that was part of the problem. I mean, look at him. Charming, funny, and when sober, so loving. He didn't have much to call his own, and believe me when I tell you that didn't matter. He didn't need a single material possession, but if he had one and you needed it, he sure would give it to you. He was the first person, that I told when I found out I was pregnant with our oldest daughter. I drove all the way to Boone to tell him because I knew he would be so excited. Joe did not want to be an addict. Neither did my dad. You can't control your genes though, and at some point there was an exposure, an opportunity to try or use something that triggered the addiction cycle. And it was then an everyday battle to become sober and to stay clean. A prescription for something as simple as a routine procedure can lead to an addiction. Inability to get another prescription can then lead to a cheaper, much easier to obtain alternative like heroin. Please don't get me wrong. As a nurse, I know that there is a place for pain medication, but in an environment where it is closely monitored and regulated. After Joe died, we found that journal in his car that clearly spelled out how desperately that he wanted to stay sober and how very hard that was. After 15 months of sobriety, all it took was that one last time. 9 years later, sharing his story does not get easier. In fact, I've had more than a few pep talks over the last few days with several moments where I wanted to text Monica and tell her I just wasn't feeling well and I wasn't going to be able to make it. But I know that there are way too many people who still do not understand that even though you think it can't or it won't happen to you or to someone that you love, The chances of you being wrong are increasing by the day. We didn't think it would happen to us either. Joe was the baby of the family, and to say he was adored would be an understatement. He was born into a Christian home with two parents that loved each other, parents that worked hard to provide a safe, loving environment. My parents sent Joe to rehab in Utah in a desperate attempt to get him the help that he needed. With my dad's history, he saw it coming, and he did his best to prevent Joe from going down the same path that he had walked. We all did everything that we knew to do to keep the rock bottom from being the loss of Joe's life. So we share his story openly to raise awareness and educate others about addiction, but also to offer hope, as we know so much more now than we knew then, and we want to share this knowledge with others in an effort to avoid this happening to someone else. People often ask us if we knew that Joe was doing heroin. I don't know if we did, and hindsight is definitely 20/20. Maybe I should just say that we probably did, but we didn't want to believe that. That's something Kurt Cobain does, and does from, not something that your sibling does. There are warning signs, things that I can look back on now, and I realize that the light bulb should have definitely been going off. Mood swings. Have mercy, the mood swings. Sober Joe was so much different than high-using Joe was. High Joe was mean. He was withdrawn. He was absent. He was somber. Polar opposite of the sober Joey that we all love so much. I'm sure that at some point he stole from me. I'm sure he stole from my husband. I'm sure he stole from my mom. I'm sure he stole from my brother in an effort to support his habit and to avoid the awful withdrawal that comes from quitting heroin. Signs of drug overuse were right in front of us, but we chose to overlook them. Oh, denial. I remember my mom finding some pipe-type glass things in one of his jackets. We also found insulin needles and a spoon that looked burnt. When confronted, of course, Joe had a friend that had diabetes that had left his insulin and his needles laying around, and he had let a buddy borrow that jacket. There were plenty of lies, manipulations along the way, but the problem was we really did want to believe them. I'll leave you with these thoughts. First and foremost, if you or someone that you love is struggling with addiction, please seek help. No one should battle addiction alone. Understand that addiction is a disease. There is no shame in getting yourself or your loved one the help that they so desperately need to live a life free from addiction's chains, a life of recovery. Trust your gut. If you think there might be a problem, there likely is a problem. Know that help is available, and it's right here in our backyard. We are fortunate to have Keystone Substance Abuse Services right here in our community. I've been blessed to have gotten to know Keystone's staff over the last 7 years as we work together to educate others about addiction and encourage those suffering to seek help without shame or guilt. Had we known that they were available to help Joe, I believe that the outcome for him would have been different. Joe left handwritten notes in his car. My favorite says hope, ... Never lose this. There is hope. There's always hope. Thank you.
Did I do that correctly?
Hi, I'm a little nervous. First, I want to just start off by saying thank you for coming here, and thank you, Keystone, for asking me to come up and spread hope. My name is Amy Lynch. I am alumni of Keystone, and I'm here to hopefully spread hope for all those that are out there suffering, and for those who are looking to help, those who need help. I feel so blessed to follow up behind Melissa, because I'm standing here today on behalf of all those who cannot stand here today. I am a mother of 2 beautiful children. I have a 23-year-old who's currently living in Michigan and an 8-year-old who's living here with me, and I feel very blessed to be their mothers. But I wanted to say that I was born an addict. I come from a long family of addiction. My father is an alcoholic in recovery. My mom is an addict who's still in addiction. My grandmother was an alcoholic in recovery, and my grandfather was an alcoholic in recovery. My uncle is an alcoholic in recovery. My cousin is an addict alcoholic in recovery. So I was really born with not much hope, but a lot of the things that fueled my addictions were, I was a victim of physical and mental abuse, rape, molestation, and a long history of mental disorders on my family's side. I started using or experimenting when I was 8 years old. There was always drugs around the home, so I tried a few things that were laying around, but by the age of 12, drinking and smoking marijuana became a weekly habit for me. By the age of 16, though, is when I really feel like a large portion of my addiction set in, and that was the first time when I started using prescription drugs. From that point on, I preferred to use any kind of pills, street pills, anything I could get my hands on. And that continued on for many years, but it wasn't until I got pregnant with my younger son that I had suffered from some chronic pain that's just normal pain. I suffer from SI joint dysfunction, and after my pregnancy with physical therapy, I should have been able to continue to not have that pain, but I fell and I injured that joint, and I became in pain constantly. I could barely walk. I got extremely overweight, and my doctor prescribed me opioids. And what started off with 1 prescription led to 2 prescriptions, which led to 3 prescriptions. And all I ever did at that point was take pills for about 3 years of my life. That's all I did. I had a daily routine. I got up, I went to the sink, took a pill. I had pills everywhere in my house, kitchen sink, bathroom sink, everywhere. And little did I know that there were other options for my pain. And really, looking back at it now, I feel like the prescriptions weren't really killing the pain of my physical pain. It was killing the pain of my past, and that's why I just needed more and more. The addiction was already there. It just wasn't really prevalent until that time. But one day, I woke up, I went to the sink, and something happened to me. I looked in the mirror, and I saw something I did not know. I didn't know who it was, I didn't know what it was, and it scared me. I was very scared, and I dropped the pills all over the place. And at that moment, I realized that I was not me, that I was a monster, basically, and that everything around me was falling apart. I don't remember the first 3 years of my son's life. I do remember one specific time when my son hurt himself, and I had to take him to the doctor, and they were questioning me over and over again. I kept thinking they were going to take my son from me because I was so high, and that they thought I had hurt him. But I went to the doctor, and it took me about 6 months to get off prescription drugs, and I started getting injections versus taking the prescription drugs. And at that point in time, I realized that I had a problem with marijuana and alcohol, and I checked myself into Keystone. And that's where my life really truly started. For the past 3 years, I've been sober or clean from marijuana, but I've still struggled with alcohol. But over the course of 3 years, I've been sober for 2 years and about 6 months. I want to say this though, that there is hope. During my time of recovery, I fulfilled a childhood dream to run a marathon. I found a way to love myself through Christ. I found hidden talents that I did not know. I married the man of my dreams. And I own a business. And I just feel so blessed today. And I just pray that all those who are out there looking for answers, the answer is hope. Just don't ever give up. Just keep fighting. That there is a life in recovery. Thank you.
The right button this time. Last week I was going up and down and back and forth, so. I want to talk about treatment options. What kind of help is there? Withdrawal management, also called detox, is something that people do sometimes medically in an inpatient setting to help get through all the terrible symptoms. What kind of symptoms they have coming off opioids. You can feel like the worst case of flu you've ever had. Abdominal cramps, chills. You can have huge goosebumps, muscle aches, all kinds of terrible physical symptoms that would make it almost impossible for you to go to a class and participate in counseling. Imagine being really sick with the flu, going to a class, and being expected to get something out of it. So, we help people do that. We use medications. Medications can include Imodium, Tylenol, we use Vistaril. Basically, these medications are to help control the symptoms of the withdrawal. Sometimes, I know at Keystone, when people have a way to cope with other things and a place to live, a way to get transportation for treatment, and we try to help them with those things too. We start them on MAT medications while they're in an inpatient setting, so that not only do they have some treatment initially for the symptoms they're going through, those physical withdrawal symptoms, but that they can get adjusted or start on the MAT medication so that once that kicks in, the cravings are less, they have a better opportunity to participate in counseling that we also offer there. So a lot of times we'll try to do that for people. In addition to that, we have counseling that's available. And if you heard Dr. Emmel talk, it's not just medications, it's not just counseling, but the best practice is to combine both of those. So what kind of things do we do in counseling? There are a variety of things. One is to learn to identify triggers. What makes the person have that thought that they need to go out and get something to use? Is it something they see, something they hear, a place, somebody they're around? And then learn coping skills as to how to, how are we going to address the cravings and the triggers? Am I going to avoid a certain place? I'm going to stay away from certain people. So learn coping strategies. Develop a plan that's individualized for recovery. And that's going to be different for everyone. It's going to involve how to deal with the triggers, how to handle your coping skills. Your coping skills may be different than mine. You'll hear that the path to recovery is different for everyone, so that may look different for everyone, and it probably should, because we can't put people in one mold and expect them to do well. They begin to deal with other mental health problems. A lot of times we see people when they're coming through the withdrawal, they're starting to think more clearly. You find out that they're suffering from depression, anxiety, maybe they've suffered trauma, they've got these other psychological things that they have to deal with. And sometimes people start using substances to combat those symptoms themselves in the beginning. So we help them deal with those as well. And then we help them to begin to develop ways to participate in life in positive, healthy ways. You don't always have to go out and have a drink with your friends. You don't always have to go out and get high at a party. So we teach them social skills and positive ways to survive, to get along day to day without the use of substances. You've already heard a lot about the medication-assisted treatment, MAT, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that, but typically what we would do is a patient would be assessed, screened, evaluated by a medical professional, and potentially started on these medications. And along with that, at least at Keystone, we have counseling services. So we're not just handing out the medications, we're trying to do the best we can with counseling as well. Best practice is to do both, so that's what we try to do. Here's some options. At Keystone, we do have withdrawal management, we have a residential program. We offer counseling in different forms as far as our populations. We have men's groups, women's groups. We have groups for adolescents, youth and adolescents. Evening groups, day groups. We've recently started MAT-specific groups because those folks have different things they have to deal with. We also have family sessions as part of that. Once a week there's a family day in the group. So we try to include the families because it does affect, as you've heard tonight, the whole family. In addition to that, we encourage people to seek other forms of support, whether it's AA, NA, family, friend, church, other groups. Some people don't like AA and NA, although it's been around for a long time. Some people prefer Smart Recovery, which deals with our thought processes and how it affects behavior. Whatever works for that person is what we need to help them with, help support them with. So anyway, you've already heard about the alumni group, which we're very fortunate to have at Keystone. A lot of organizations and agencies don't have that. I think that is such a big support to other people going through treatment. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
While Sheriff Colson's coming up, some of you may have some questions up to this point. While he's talking, if you would try to write those out, and when he's finished, we'll take those up and address them.
Good evening. First, I want to thank York Comprehensive High, and I guess I'm taller than you, York Comprehensive High and Keystone for hosting this event and making it happen. I'm elated to see you all out here, but I'd be lying to tell you I'm not disappointed that the auditorium's not full, because what's being said tonight, I feel like our community really needs to know. To Melissa and Amy, thank you for your courage and your message. It's very powerful. So I'm here tonight to talk to you about Narcan or naloxone and the program, but I also want to sort of bring it home to you about the opioid problem here. We see it on the news as we see many things, and we may not want to believe that it's here in our community, but it is definitely here. Ask any law enforcement officer or medical professional, they'll tell you. If you have not been affected by the opioid crisis, stay tuned, you will in some form or fashion. And so the first thing I want to do is kind of bring it home, as Amy and Melissa have done, and I'm just going to read you the summary of an incident report that recently came across dispatched to a call concerning two subjects that were passed out in a vehicle at the intersection of Haynes Mill Highway and Charlotte Highway in York County, South Carolina. Upon arrival, I saw two subjects on the ground with citizens performing CPR on both individuals. It was apparent that both subjects, who were later identified as Jane Doe and John Smith, I inserted those names, and if John Smith is in the crowd, I'm sorry. Jane Doe and John Smith were having signs of a drug overdose. I performed a sternum rub on both subjects and they began agonally breathing. EMS arrived on scene a few minutes after my arrival and administered Narcan to both subjects. Both Doe and Smith became conscious after the Narcan was administered and were transported to the hospital by the EMS units. The complainant noticed both the subjects unconscious in a 1990 blank Toyota pickup, gray in color, with a black 10 to 12 foot trailer attached to the back of it. The truck belongs to John Smith. The complainant then pulled them out of the car and moved the truck to the side of the road. Some citizens then began performing CPR. And the report goes on to name the citizens and the fact that the car would have been towed by a wrecker service. This occurred not 2 months ago at the busiest intersection in the western part of York County. It's the second time that we've had an overdose in traffic at that intersection. And to me, if that doesn't hit home, I don't know what does. And so the next thing that I want to do is show you a video. This is an actual body cam video of a police officer administering Narcan to an individual who's overdosing. Chief Watts is in the back there with Rock Hill Police Department. He and I are partners in this fight, as we are with all the chiefs. This is a video of his agency at the Harris Teeter in Rock Hill performing this administration of Narcan. Just right in the video or in play. Okay, I'm a dummy.
Baby, stay awake. Open your mouth for me. Okay. Yeah. Father, wake up, baby. Okay. You know if she's taking anything? I have no idea. I just walked over and I told her. I just gave her a ride. I got your appreciate it. Oh, wake up, baby. Yeah, sure. It's fine. Yeah. Wake up, baby. Squeeze my hand. Squeeze my hand. Come on, baby. Squeeze my hand. What's your name? Paula. What happened to her? Oh, I gave her. She walked up in my yard as I was getting in. She asked for a ride. I didn't want to give her a ride, but she wanted me to. Okay, yeah. Okay. Move it. Okay.
Paula.
Okay. Patient's in and out of consciousness.
Narcan. No, not at the moment.
David reading some good Narcan.
Hey. Paula, wake up for me, okay? Come on. Paula, come on.
David 3.
There we go. Hey, keep on making some noises for me, okay? Come on. You got a pulse on her?
I can find it.
I'll tell you a lot. I don't have a pulse.
I don't feel one.
She's very faint. She's got, there we go. There we go. Come on. Come on, Paula. Breathe. Come on. I got another one in the back of my car for you. Hey, there we go. There we go. Good job, Paula. Come on. There you go. There you go. Keep on breathing for me, okay?
Good pulse. We got her breathing again.
She's got a good pulse. I just don't have her watching. Okay. All right.
Not 100% sure she was like this when we got here.
She was sent over.
Yeah. We administered Narcan already.
Hey, Paula. Very good. Hey, Paula, come on, come back.
Come on, Paula, talk to us, okay?
Come on.
Your one?
Just one, yeah.
Just out there,
Come
4
on.
milligram.
Come on, Paula. You're almost there.
Come on.
Come back to me, girl. Come on, Paula.
It's faint. Can you feel it there?
You can feel it in there. It's really, really faint in her wrists.
So, the Narcan program for law enforcement, known as Leon, began in 2015 with a law change that allows law enforcement officers basically the Good Samaritan waiver of liability, I guess, so to speak, to administer this drug to those that they believe are overdosing. And so, Chief, I think you were the first agency to come on board, and the Sheriff's Office was the second. And we had trained our officers in the very early year of 2016. Since October of 2016, over 431 officers in York County have been trained, and we've administered Narcan over 100 times. Law enforcement has. Many times we are the first responders to those overdoses because the scene may not be safe for EMS to enter. And so we're the first folks who are coming into contact with these folks who are overdosing. Narcan's been around since the 70s. And we have it on board. I have actually been questioned as to why law enforcement is involved in what seems to be a medical procedure, and why are we saving addicts' lives because they are some of our crime problem. And to that, I just say that's not for us to judge. That the good Lord has given us a tool, and if even one of those addicts can be a story to tell and help turn other folks around, then we need to do that. Additionally, if you don't subscribe to that argument, we come into contact with fentanyl, carfentanil, and opioids every day. And so it is also a tool, unfortunately, that we need to carry for ourselves and for each other, because it takes a very small amount of fentanyl or carfentanil to ingest, either orally or through absorption of the skin. And so we carry it in the event that we have to administer it to each other. Our drug chemists in the drug lab have it on board. Our DNA folks in the DNA lab have it on board, and every sworn officer at the Sheriff's Office has the availability to Narcan. And so it began with a partnership in 2015 with DHEC and Deotis, and you'll have to help me, I get it wrong every time, Danielle, the South Carolina Department of Alcohol and Drug Abuse Services. And the Fifth Circuit, which includes Richland County Prosecutor's Office, got a grant along with DHEC, and they are able to provide any law enforcement agency in South Carolina this Narcan free of charge to that agency. And so I pray that we don't have to have any more administrations. I know that that's not the reality, but that is what's going on in the law enforcement arena as it pertains to Narcan and opioid overdoses. Do you want me to talk about that at all? It came up in the last one. So a question came up in the last summit about medically assisted treatment and what's going on with our folks who are in the criminal justice system and folks who may be incarcerated. I'm happy to report to you that we are on the cusp of starting a program that parallels our drug court and drug treatment court. Solicitor Brackett has traditionally been an abstinence-based advocate. Through much deliberation and conversation, and I think introspection on his part. He has agreed to run a parallel court that includes medicated assisted treatment, that has a drug court component, and there is discussion to actually start this medicated assisted treatment in the detention center, if it can at all happen. There's some real physical challenges there, and some logistical issues. So it is in the works in the criminal justice field here in York County. And so with that, I will be available here for the Q&A, and I'll also be available after the summit is over to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
If you have a question, raise your hand and Daniel will pick it up. While they're doing that, Melissa, I thought maybe you might want to tell everybody about Joe Davis Run. Because there may be some people that don't know, and we certainly would love for them to join us. So. You can either there or stand up. I believe people can hear you.
Yeah, now sorry about that. This is where my face probably lights up. So when I mentioned 7 years ago that we had the opportunity to get to know the Keystone staff, that is because we've worked together, my family and Keystone have worked together to organize a race. It's now known as the Joe Davis Run for Recovery. It started off as the Joe Davis Memorial Resolution Run and was held in January, but with the frigid temperatures, we've moved it to March in hopes that this year maybe we'll get actually into the 30s or the 40s. But the last couple of years, we've probably had 900 people to 1,000 people come out. We do a 1 mile fun run, a 5K and a 10K. 100% of the proceeds go directly to Keystone to support the men's outpatient treatment program. The community has been wonderful. We have some amazing sponsors. Piedmont has sponsored with us, and I think over 7 years we've raised, tell me if I'm wrong, over $130,000 to support people in treatment. So we would love to have y'all join us. The website is joedavisrun.com. You do not have to be a runner. You can be a walker. We also have a sleep-in, stay-warm option, and registration is open. It opens every year on October 4th, and moving it to March was also a pretty cool decision because Joe's birthday was March 23rd. So it will be March 9th of 2019, but we would love to have you join us. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you. I should have said, when I said to write your questions down, and to type them. This is a question for Amy. Where's Amy? Amy, there you are. Let's see if I can read this. This person did not type this. When you were suffering with low back pain after your second child was born, did the physician who treated you with opioids know about your history of previous drug experimentation as a teenager? And what words would you have for that physician today?
To be honest with you, I don't know if that was ever even a question that was asked about whether or not I ever had any experimenting or whether or not I had any family members who were in recovery or in addiction since. Thankfully, I went to that same doctor and told her that I believed that I was addicted
that question is a great question because I know y'all have heard of the SCRIPS program, and that program helps doctors understand, not understand, but helps them have a checklist where they can see whether someone has been prescribed opioids from another physician, and it has helped that problem a lot. But when you were probably that age, we weren't nearly as knowledgeable and sophisticated as we are now about this issue and the problems with over-medicating and having more than one prescription and so forth. So this message, is for Kathy. Do these treatments require medical insurance? How would you recommend? Oh, that's not for me.
That's another question.
Do these treatments require medical insurance?
Keystone doesn't turn anybody away, so if there's a problem, just come in.
Okay. I know insurance is an issue though, because here's a question for Dr. Emil. It says, the long road back from addiction is well known. Insurance is a real issue because of the length of recovery. Do you have any thoughts about how to jump this financial hurdle?
So if you have insurance, most insurances are coming around these days to covering opioid-related treatment, including medications. We have committees working with Medicaid right now to make sure that they have access to all the available medications, that they're going to approve those. The state, DOS, all of their agencies throughout the state do not turn anyone away. There may be a charge, there may be a prorated charge, but no one is turned away from treatment in the state system. So in today's age, there's always somewhere you can go to where you're going to get at least somehow. And let me just say about that previous one, physicians these days should be asking about your history and about your family history. And people with problems should be saying to that doctor, as you did, I have a problem, don't prescribe this. There may still be some physicians who want to convince you, don't worry, it's safe. Your problem is opioids, not Xanax. If you're there, you're at the wrong doctor for you.
Dr. Emma, while you're up, how long are people to be on medication-assisted treatment?
This is a question that could occupy an entire college course. The short-lived answer is, how long would you be on your diabetic medication? As long as it was still helping it and you still need it. That's pretty much the case, but there's everybody. When you go to the doctor's office and they find high blood pressure and they measure it, the first words out of your mouth are not, gosh, I have high blood pressure, it's, that can't be me. I was nervous, blah, blah, blah. Nobody wants to have these conditions. Likewise, nobody wants to be taking medication for a condition. So it's true for hypertension, it's true for diabetes, it's true for addiction. Patients don't want to either. So there is no good answer. It should be used as long as it's helping. And in my head, even in my primary care practice, when I had a family medicine practice, even with the diabetes or hypertension, I was always willing to say, let's try without it and see how you do. So it's reasonable to try when all the stars are aligned. That's the opportunity. Some people will succeed getting off medication. Some may not.
Just stay standing.
This question simply says, how much abuse of methadone happens? Kind of goes along with it. This question too is kind of combined, that is abstinence versus MAT. How do you convince those who are skeptical about treating addiction with drugs? I guess those are kind of the same type of question.
I spend a lot of my time going around making these comparisons with other chronic diseases so that people can try to have a better perspective on the use of medication. Abstinence will be right for some people, and it's not easy to always tell the difference. What was the first part of that?
About methadone abuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, so said, the research says that most of the street value of methadone, buprenorphine is people trying to stabilize themselves between the getting high with the other drugs. Not that they're trying to treat themselves, but they're just trying to stay stable. Research also shows that most of the overdose deaths that involve methadone involved methadone tablets from people who are using it for chronic pain or particularly terminal illness and hospice. There's a lot of medications left over. Of all of the methadone deaths, there are a relatively small percentage involve the methadone that are handed out, that are given out for take-home sometimes in methadone clinics. It does happen, but it's less than one might think. Consequently, people prescribing should be extra careful and have all of the protective mechanisms at their hand. Urine drug screens, checking the scripts program, frequent visits, mandatory counseling, all the things that help to keep someone in the treatment rather than just out there on their own.
You can sit down now. Thank you. This question is for Alex. Alex, please stand up. Alex also works with Keystone, and she does a lot of things in prevention. And actually, there are two questions here. And one, it says, what prevention services are being offered in schools? What grade levels do they cover, and have they been effective? And also related, would you recommend teachers, especially at high school students, have conversation with their students about opioids?
Absolutely. So at Keystone Prevention, one of the huge things that we've been doing that's very unique to York County is a program called Life Skills. Like Dr. Emmel talked about, it's science, evidence-based, there's been proven results. And what Life Skills does is it offers our youth in every sixth grade classroom throughout York County. We're in 3 out of 4 school districts right now with all these sixth graders talking about coping skills, how to properly cope with their stress, anger management, you know that's huge at that age. They're kind of coming of age. We discuss ways with communication among family members, how to speak up, talk when something's not going right, talk about grades, frustrations. So there's about 15 lessons where we're in a classroom setting doing these. And the teachers are all educated on this as well because this life skill program actually fits in with the standards of the state requirements for the health classes. But we just as Keystone specialists, prevention specialists, come in with a little bit of a different perspective because we're able to reach the youth a little differently than the teachers can. The students see the teachers every day. It's a little bit harder to take them seriously. So we're in there, non-judgmental, and we help answer any questions we can. So that's one of the programs we offer. Another thing we do is Prime for Life. And Prime for Life is our more so intervention program. When we're starting to see youth, especially the freshmen, sophomore high schoolers, and we're seeing middle schoolers now being caught with substances such as the jewels, the vaping devices, marijuana, and alcohol. And like our alumni shared with us, those are essentially these gateway opening to potential other riskier behaviors and decisions. And so that's another program we're able to offer out there, and we're hoping to be piloting if we get some grants within the high school, this Prime for Life program as a more prevention, because we know in the high school at that point, the curiosity and things are starting to develop there. So far with our prevention program with the life skills, we're measuring decision-making skills. And we've been doing this for about a year within the 3 school districts, and we've seen from the implementation of day 1 with our pre-survey to the very end with our post-survey that these students' decision-making and understanding around the substances has significantly increased. So we are having an impact with our youth.
Thank you, Alex. Question here about what is the legislature doing about this problem? A long list of bills have passed or being considered or are going to be considered in the next session. I'm not bringing it with me, so I can't be specific. I do know that there is a long list, and there are a lot of the opioid issues have to do with prescribing practices, which when Dr. Naley did his 2013 impact study on this issue. He has 6 solutions, and all 6 of them targeted prescribers. So it's not surprising to see that a lot of legislation that's coming about now has to do with prescribing practice. I know the American Dental Association has a prescribing practice for their dentists all over the country. And some of the ones in York County have followed that, others have not. Their prescribing practice is really strict. They're suggesting that to prescribe no more than 5 opioid tablets for a patient who's had their wisdom teeth out. Obviously, it's refillable, but all the dentists have told me that they do that on an as-needed basis. It's not done carte blanche. So, I'm sorry I can't answer that more specifically. If whoever asked this question will give me their email address, I'll try to send you some of the bills that are on the docket. Here's a comment, I think it's a comment. Yeah. Since Big Pharma caused the epidemic, are they now supplying the medication treatment free? I will tell you this, if you read that book, you will not have good thoughts about Big Pharma. You will not have good thoughts about Big Pharma. That is an indictment on Purdue Pharma and Big Pharma. It's amazing what they did to promote OxyContin in 1996 and beyond. It is absolutely amazing what they did.
Sorry, this one also asks about Winthrop stats, and we don't have Winthrop stats right now. However, we have partnered with a few professors in the social work department, and so we could possibly work with them. They're helping us with the MIT drug court and the incarceration piece of it, doing all that evaluation, so we could get with them and try to get some more data, but you gotta go now.
One more thing, because I'm so excited to talk about it, is when we talk about our teachers having an understanding around this opioid epidemic, right now, especially Abby, she's one of our prevention specialists, was in the school all day today, one of our local high schools, I won't name which. But we encourage you, if you're a parent and you want to get your teachers, reach out to the guidance counselor and have a Keystone person get in touch with them. Abby was there all day educating the teachers all around opioid epidemic, and then tomorrow she'll be hosting a parent education, and then that same information gets tailored down to the high school students level, and on Friday it'll be sent out to every high school student, and that high school is doing the right way. So if you feel like your student is in the middle or high school that can benefit from that, we'll be here at the end. We'd love to give you our contact card.
Before one more question, but I wanted to add something to Sheriff Tolson's comments on that, because I think you heard them when they were on the tape talking about the lady officer said that she had another dose in her car. Remember she said that? All the officers have 2 doses for a reason, because there's only there's a limited amount of time that the dose will work. And sometimes if there's a long delay between the first responder and the ambulance, then there may have to be you may have to administer a second dose, so that's why they have 2 doses. Anyway, the last question, and this is to Kathy. It says, what MAT options are available for youth?
Well, we actually have had a few teens come through our program, and essentially they're evaluated just like an adult. Parents, if they're underage, can be involved as well, but they're evaluated by the prescribers, participating counseling, and just pretty much the same.
Treatment is not any different from the addiction as the disease, regardless of the age, right?
They may have age-related groups they're in, they're
Right.
different group, age group.
One question that I have is when you're counseling with a patient, how do you get them over the hurdle of going back to the same group of friends, the same crowd, the same place, the same folks that are still using, they're trying to stop. That's got to be a big hurdle.
It is a big hurdle, and sometimes it's very difficult, even if they want to get in a different environment, because sometimes there's no other environment for them to go to. But we do our best to try to educate and try to help them find another place to go. Whether it's an Oxford House kind of situation or whatever. So our counselors will provide as much case management as possible to help them get through that.
Let's say something real quick. I just want to reiterate that Keystone serves regardless of ability to pay. That means if you have not 1 cent to your name, you come and you receive treatment. That means if you are insured but you're underinsured, which means you have a high deductible or you just can't afford what after insurance pays, which is a lot of times is still a big deal. That means what we'll do is we'll do a financial assessment with you. We'll determine what you're able to pay, and then that is what you pay. If you can't pay anything, you still receive treatment. So just so you know, because some people still, to this day, I still hear it, say, I can't afford to do these things. That is not true. Okay? Is that clear? Want to make sure.
All right, so we had one more question. I don't know if we have any school people in the audience. But this one is, if I understand this correctly, this is related to doing random drug screening for students. And I know off the top of my head, I don't know if anybody is here from Clover, that Clover School District does drug screen all their athletes. And they don't really do it as a consequence. They do it to try to get people help. And so there really is not a consequence till like the second or third time. I know Rock Hill School District had talked about it last year. It did not go through. I don't know if there's any other school people here that want to comment on that. Oh, there we go.
Lexington won not only randomly drug test athletes, but also anybody who drives on campus. So in order to get your driving pass to Rock Hill High School campus as a student, you have to sign an agreement that you will be randomly drug tested. So 7 through 12. And 7 is because we have athletes who are celebrating.
And it was controversial in Rock Hill because we didn't understand why the athletes were the only ones that got tested.
I can explain why they do that. The reason it was given to us is because they can put another athlete in danger. And so that's the principle they went with it, because they're participating in activities that can endanger another child and they're not aware of what they're doing. That is the reason. And that's how we also got drivers, because they're operating on computers.
Like a 90-mile-an-hour fastball, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. That's one of the examples that were given to us. Okay.
In relation to that, I just want to add one more point. My friend's community is a community where they don't even talk about weed or electricity, nothing, absolutely nothing. My friend's community. But my friend's children, I was shocked to hear that. And even I don't know, being a provider, I don't know how to share this with my friend, with my own friends in my age, saying that the child is using the drug. I don't know how to express this, but I know that the children are using. But being a provider of Brussels, I don't want none of the kids to use it. But how we can handle it? How we can help these children to get into the primary care, or how to reach the doctor. We don't want to be too late. How we can start an early screening to find out our high school students or the middle school, they are using it. They were using as a party time, but how we can find out and start the treatment for them. It's a big question for me. I don't know how to handle it. I'm just going to look at it.
Well, I know our schools are dialed into, I don't know, how many of you have heard of ACE scores? Heard of ACE scores? ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And I think ideally it would be good for all of our educators to be on the lookout for students who've had an ACE score of 4 or higher, are really in danger of having a substance abuse issue as they get older. And if we can identify those students at an early age and have that 25 or 35 students per elementary school, or whatever the number is, and guidance counselors know who they are, and they know whether they need nurture or not, and how to give that nurture and counseling. That would be my own personal vision of how I see ACE scores used in the elementary schools. I guess the same thing could happen in high school. Of course, the nature of ACE score is by the time they get to high school, they've already had these experiences that affect them and are detrimental to their mental health. But that's a good question, and I think that I said this last week too, our schools are charged with doing so many things that when we put other things on their plate, sometimes it's hard for them to deal with it in a way that's effective without having some medical advice or some other psychological advice or and that kind of thing. So that's a great question, and it's something that our teachers and counselors and principals need to be aware of in a high school setting. Dave.
I'm a primary care physician, and as of several years ago, is now standard of care for adolescents to be screened for anxiety and depression during routine visits to see their family doctor. So knowing that those teens who are struggling with depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms are more prone to seek relief with alcohol or drugs, marijuana. That's a step in the right direction. That as long as these teens are plugged into a regular source of care, they should be getting screened now for anxiety and depression on a routine basis.
All right, I know we're over time, and I hate that this lady left and she did not put a name on this, probably intentional. But she left some kind words, so Bob and I thought we would end with this. She said to the Davis family, she was a fellow classmate. She said Joey was the kindest soul ever. So she wanted me to read that out loud. And then she said, Sheriff Tolson and Keystone, I pray the blood of Jesus over you all. Without you, our community would not be as beautiful as it is today. Good still exists. Our youth needs you all. Amen. So.
Great way to end. We have some information down here. If you would, before you leave, stop by, grab a water bottle and business card or whatever is down here for you, some information that you can take home with you. Thanks for coming. I know this crowd was not as big as we'd like. This is I don't know if you knew this or not, but this is an election season. And by saying that, there are many forums in the county tonight for school board and county council and others. And that has caused our attendance to be low, but I am really appreciative for you being here, and I hope you will stay a minute and come up front. If you have any questions for the speakers,